We're talking about the American prisoners of war in German camps, and in German they would say Amerikanische Kriegsgefangene in Deutschland. That is the German part. As a Dutch person, I learned how to speak German too. It's somewhat similar. This pertains to all the American POWs of all services. 93,941 were captured in Europe and interned in POW camps, roughly about 100-some camps. 92,820 survived. Only about 1,120 perished due to wounds that they probably had when they jumped out of airplanes, maybe from diseases, but only 1,120 died, and some of them were actually from the death marches also. But look at the statistics of the Japanese. 27,465 and 11,000 did not return. The Soviets really got hit hard. 5.7 million men entered as prisoners, 3.3 million died in captivity. The Soviets were so brutally treated by the Germans and their allies. The Soviets had not signed the third convention, the third Geneva Convention from 1929, how to treat prisoners of war. They did not sign that. The Germans did, the Japanese did not either. Now, what is the Stalag Luft we're talking about? The Air Force men, the Army Air Corps, Army Air Force, Army Air Corps, they were confined in Stalag Luft. Luft means air, that means Air Force. So the Stalag is an abbreviation of Stammlager, and Stammlager means base camp, and the Allied Air Force men were guarded by the Luftwaffe. The Navy was guarded by the German Navy, and they call them Marienlager. The Allied Army officers, which there are very few in the beginning of the war, they were mostly airmen in the beginning. Later, after the Battle of the Bulge, there were a lot of Army men captured also, and they ended up in Offizierlager, which is offlags for the officers. And if you were a grunt in the Army, then, let's say anything from corporal and down, then you ended up in Mannschaftlager, which is not all that good either. Although they were both, the Americans and the Brits, the French and all the other allies were all treated pretty well, but the Brits and the Americans were separated. They were not in one camp. They were maybe in one camp, but not in the same compound. Each compound was kind of guarded by its own set of towers. This is called a Mannschaft Stammlager, the M. That means that probably guys were of lower levels than NCOs, non-commissioned officers. This is Stammlager 4B, which is for the lower ranks. So you had officers, NCOs, and then the ones below that. None of the Air Force men were below NCO. They were all sergeants and up. So they were treated a little bit better. Now, there's a big difference between this gate and this. This is a gate from Auschwitz. Auschwitz is an extermination camp for the Jewish population in Europe. It had nothing to do with this. They were not treated very well. We know that. When we were talking about Europe, where were those camps? Well, there's one here in Lithuania. There's 5 of them in Poland. A couple of them in Germany, and one here in Krems, Austria. That is where the Stalag Lufts were. And then all over this area were a number of Stalags that were for different nationalities, Army, Navy, Milex and so. But Stalag Lufts, only 8 or 9. Here are the numbers. Stalag Luft 1 is in Barth, which is up here. Barth is number 1 here. It's the Baltic Sea. That was one camp. The number 2 camp is right here, is in Łódź, in the center of Poland. And number 3 is Sagan, Poland, Stalag Luft III. Stalag number 4 is where Mr. Dwight Davis here, he's our guest speaker in a little bit. He will be taken over and talk about his experience of the Death March. It's almost like the Bataan March in the Philippines. Stalag number 4 in Kroos Tukov, right here. And the next one will be number 5, which is in Halle Saale in the center of Germany. And then number 6 is 6 is here, Heidekrug in Lithuania. Number 7 is right here, Bankau in Poland. Lambsdorff, the one above that. And then here, then there's a whole bunch of no numbers anymore after 8. 17 is Krems, Austria. And then this is a Stalag. The Stalag is not the Luftstalag. Luftstalag is for Air Force people, protected by Air Force. Here you see a number of Stalag Lufts and Stalags mixed up, and Milak, as they say in German. Really not, kind of hard to see on that. What do we know about those Stalag Lufts? There were 7,700 Americans and 1,427 in Barth, up there in the Baltic Sea. Stalag Luft III had 7,500 Americans and 900 different personnel, allied. And they were all Air Force. Stalag Luft IV in Chukov in Poland, 8,000 Americans and about 800 POW Brits. Each airman that was caught when they jumped out of an airplane or they were captured anywhere in Europe, all the way down from Norway, all the way down to the coast of North Africa, they were all brought to one place in Germany. And that place was in Oberursel. That was the interrogation center. All allies from the West, the French, the Brits, the Americans, the Canadians, all of those, when they were captured, they were brought, transported all to this one place and interrogated by a whole team of interrogators, specially trained. They knew the language, they knew everything about the prisoner. If you arrived at that interrogation camp, they knew exactly what you were, everything. They even knew your mother's name and which school you went to. So how in the heck do they know all that? They knew everything. So this interrogation center in Oberursel, the interrogation would take anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. If you were a high-placing officer in the early part of that war, when the guys were captured, they might have been sergeants, staff sergeants, second lieutenants, first lieutenant. They didn't know a lot more than the airplane. But if you can catch a colonel, he knew a lot more. So we squeeze him a little harder, and we stick him in the cooler, which is not all a bad place to be, and we talk to him for 1 to 4 weeks, and there is no waterboarding. They didn't even touch him. It was more like, would you like to have a cigarette? Would you like to have a drink? Coffee? Okay. Well, my name is Bill Albers. My rank is first lieutenant, and here's my serial number. That's all I was supposed to tell. And he said, now, how do I know you're Bill Albers? And if I was stubborn and kept this up, they would send me back to the cooler, and the next day I would be out again and would be interrogated until I gave really, what was I doing in the airplane? Well, I was a waist gunner or a navigator. Okay, we knew that all along. How's your wife doing, Sophie, by the way, and your son, Michael? They knew everything about you. So they must have had some spy system out there in England. The interrogator knew everything about you, and once he was done with you, with this interrogation, most of the guys were told by their own intelligence when they were trained in England that they may try to trick you a little bit, and they'll feed you booze and some good-looking women. So a lot of the young men said, hell, what do you want to know? Give me booze and give me the woman. So they didn't care, but if you're ranked lower, you really don't know anything about the secrets that they wanted to hear about. So once you were finished in the interrogation center in Oberursel, they sent you to this Dulag Luft. It's a transition camp, and from the transition camp, they sent you to the different Stalag Lufts all over Europe. That's how they went. So here you see again Lithuania, Poland, Germany, and this is all of this here, all of those guys that were captured in this whole area were all brought to this place right here in Oberursel. And they were, the army, whoever the armed forces were that caught the man were under strict instructions. Those people are of value. Don't do anything bad to them because we use them for negotiations later. for exchange of prisoners. Mr. Goebbels, we heard that name before, right? The Minister of Propaganda in Germany, would be on the radio all the time, and he was telling the German population that those people in the bombers were gangsters, gangster airmen. So if you can get one, and just kill them. Take a pitchfork, stick them right in there. But the militia was under strict instruction, the home guards and the armed forces. You capture the man, he looks like he's pretty well wounded out there. You need to bring him in alive. Don't kill him. Don't do anything to him. We need that man to be interrogated. So, Gangsterflieger, that's what they call him in German, the gangster airman. Here you see from the face of this guy, he's surrounded by Air Force Luftwaffe men. He is not an American. I can see it on his uniform. Must be a Brit or a Canadian. They had this kind of uniform jacket on. But you can see it's pretty well under the influence. Now, what is this Oberursel Center? There was a military intelligence gathering, and they squeezed a little bit of information out of it. All the men had to go through some kind of an interrogation. The Oberursel covered only the Western theater of operations. Britain, US, Canada, France, those are the airmen. They were all flying out of England and out of Italy, of course. And they had to squeeze a little bit out of them, and they got a lot of information from what the guy had in his pocket, the pictures that he had from his wife and kids, what was in the airplane. They were supposed to eat the charts, you know, or whatever secrets they had on board, supposed to eat it. And yeah, you try to do that when the airplane is in the spin and you try to jump out of it for your life. The airplane crashed, and the parts that weren't burned, they sifted through there and found every piece of information and put it in this big puzzle. In 1941, only 400 to 500 guys were captured. They only had 4 interrogators, 50 support people. Why 41 only 400 or 500? Because the Americans weren't there yet. But look what happened in 1942. December the 7th, Pearl Harbor, right after the first bombers went over to England, right? And bombers were shot down, men were captured. And now in 1942, we had 3,000 were interrogated. In 43, more planes went down, 8,000. In 44, 29,000. We are building this airplane here, this B-17. It is a memorial to those people who died for us. 24,000 airmen died with this airplane, this type. 4,300 bombers, 4,300 were shot down and hit the ground. And men will jump out and try to survive, and they were captured. 40,000 POWs, airmen, just from that type of airplane, the 17 and the 24, they're kind of combined, but mostly 17s. You can see there were staggering numbers of Allied airmen that had to jump out and get captured. The interrogators were very intelligent. They spoke the language well. Most of them had lived probably in the US or in Britain or in France. They spoke the language. They knew exactly how the night bombers worked, the night fighters, the day, night, everything. They knew everything. They were well trained. They were after tidbits of little information, and they were scared. The prisoner didn't even know he was giving that information out. They knew all about American and British bombers. They selected the interrogator for that particular branch of the service in that country. This is what they call the cooler. This is a sketch from a prisoner. And if they went in the cooler for 1 to 4 weeks, no more than 4 weeks, because the Geneva Convention said you cannot squeeze and interrogate him for more than 4 weeks. So if you were, after 28 days, you kind of say, okay, we got enough with him, send him out. But this is the cooler. There was a window in there, and this window was opaque, so you couldn't see out, but the light was still coming through. And they spent their time out there thinking about what could happen. Maybe tomorrow I can tell them I want some booze and a woman, you know, something like that. But That didn't materialize. It was just a rumor. Now, what were the interrogators looking for? Why did the airplane crash or land? Is the airman really claims what he is? Is he the one he claims to be? Is he maybe a spy? Is he looking after the escape routes? What does he want? Is he here for interrogation methods? Maybe he's willing to help us. We'll send him back as a spy in England. Is he a war criminal in the eyes of the Germans? Is the airplane a new model with a new weapon system, a larger engine? Can they reach higher altitudes, greater speeds, more bombs? The Germans wanted to know all that because they were pounded on daily by bombing formations. So new air combat techniques and all of that stuff they were after. And every time they got a little bit more. If you got 20,000 people to interrogate, you get a little bit from everybody. It fits into this large puzzle. And information about Fido and Pluto. What is that? Pluto and Fido. Okay. Well, they were of great interest to the Germans. Where are the invasions? NGO, North Africa, Normandy. They never found out exactly that they were going to land in Normandy, right? They thought it was going to be further north. Fido later, and Pluto. Now, what is Fido? A fog investigation dispersal operation. It is amazing when you read this. England is a country that lays in the middle of this Atlantic, right? Fog sets in, the bombers are out. They're out there, their night missions. The RAF did the night bombing, the Americans did daytime bombing. The guys are coming back at 4 in the morning. The next batch of Americans takes off, it's 7 in the morning. Fog is thick. Airplanes can't get in, can't get out. So at some airfields, what they did, along this 5,000-foot runway, they had fuel nozzles spraying fuel, kerosene up, 10 feet up, and they set them on fire. And this long runway, like runway lights, would burn off the water droplets. So it created a tunnel of no fog. And the airplanes can see the glow from far away, and they would fly into this tunnel of no fog. It saved 11,000 airmen, just this, and several airfields had it. That is fog investigation dispersal operation. The Germans wanted to know, where are those? And they were probably willing to bomb them, if they knew exactly where they were at. Pluto is another one of those interesting things. You remember that story about Patton got stuck? He didn't have gasoline. He was mad as hell. He wanted to storm deep into Germany. Well, after they couldn't do nothing until they had complete control over the North Sea. So they laid pipelines under the ocean. That's what it means, Pluto. And the Germans wanted to know, where are those pumping stations and where are those reservoirs? So they pumped through 20 pipelines 1 million gallons every day of gasoline for the troops, for the tanks, for the airplanes. In case of interrogation, the airman was told name, rank, and serial number. I must have bored him. Don't give any false information or lie about anything because the enemy knew it anyway. When you're captured, most information they knew would come from the prisoners because they squealed. Again, name, grade, and army serial number. Don't carry letters on your body because that will help the enemy identify your unit. Dulag Luft, Durchgangslager Luftwaffe. That's an abbreviation for this. It means transition camp. So after you were in this Oberursel, you went sent to Wetzlar, 33 miles north of Frankfurt, and then they sent you by train to your different camps. Here you see the guys going en route to the camps. Here they were marching to town. And I'm not sure, Mr. Dwevers can tell me better, but sometimes when they marched the prisoners through the little towns, stones were thrown at them, and people were spitting on them because they call them the Gangsterflieger. Remember the gangsters? But they were protected by the Air Force personnel that guarded them. Those are Air Force people. I'm not going to talk about this a little bit more. This is about the convention in the Geneva Convention says you must treat the prisoners according to the rules you agreed on. Stalag Luft III was in Sagan. These were the famous stories from The Great Escape. Remember the Steve McQueen? He sits on his motorcycle and he was going to fly over the fence into Switzerland. Well, there were no Americans in Stalag Luft III. They were all British and they were all officers. And this story never happened, but that sounds good like a Hollywood story. Hitler got so ticked off, after the second escape, he had warned him, don't escape. 76 men escaped. 3 were able to get back to England via Spain. 50 of them were then, at the order of Hitler, executed. They were shot to death. That will set an example. They won't do that again. You know, that's how the reason was. It was an officers' camp. There were a total of 11,000 men almost there in 1945. And they had 200 men per barrack, 15 men per bunk room. So you had 1, 2, 3 up, small rooms. And there were almost 10,000. So there had be quite a few barracks, almost like 50 barracks. The food was marginally sufficient. They were always starving. They were always hungry. And they got Red Cross parcels from home. They came through Switzerland. Can you see it up there? Is the flag blocking you? No? Okay. Then there was a march to Nuremberg, and then and then to Moosburg. That was Stalag Luft III. This is the Stalag Luft III. Here's the north compound. Here's the west compound, south, center, and east compounds. Those held then 10,000 men. Stalag Luft III. They look pretty good, but you can see their legs are not particularly heavy, so it must be they were starving all the time. Officers separated from NCOs and privates. Officers did not be in the same camp. They separated them. Officers could not be forced to work. Very interesting. If I was lieutenant or major or whatever, I was not allowed to work. So all I can do is sit around and talk and go to sessions. They had libraries built up for them. They went to training classes. They even had college degree courses. You can even get a degree if you did it long enough in the camp. There were enough people that had accredited. They had knowledge. They did so many things. They all got paid too. The officers were not allowed to work, and they got paid. They got paid the same amount in Deutschmark, if you call it Deutschmark, as the officer of equivalent rank in the Luftwaffe. So if I was a colonel, I would get the same pay as the colonel in the German Luftwaffe. But that was not in the form of money. It was in the form of IOUs, called Gutschein. So you can take this Gutschein, you get so many of them, you can go to the camp store and buy additional food, mostly food and items. Now, you say, who are you buying it from? The stores were run by the POWs, but the ranking officer of the camp, the Americans then, let's say it's a colonel, would negotiate with the Germans the goods and the prices. So I can go to the store, I have, let's say I got 50 Gutscheins, and I go out there and buy some food to, at least I'm not always hungry. The officers were not too bad off. Got a little worse by the NCOs. The NCOs could be forced to work, but only light work and supervisory work, and they get paid again what the sergeant would get paid, which is a lot less. So what the officer would do, they would get part of their Gutschein, right, the money, the Lagergeld they call that, they would transfer it to the NCOs and the Mannschaft, which is then the soldiers. So there was transfer of money so they can buy in their stores goods. So the higher up you are, the better you are. It's still that way, right? The mighty are always better off. And the convention was signed by 47 countries, by Japan and the Soviet Union. And the Swiss and the Swedes would inspect each camp. And of course, when the inspection was coming, they knew that way in advance. All the prisoners were told to better behave, or there will be some pain after they're gone. So they had the right to receive mail and parcels, but In the camp, there was normal military discipline. If a colonel was in charge, then he had his majors and his captains, and he had his own staff. There were the newsletters, everything had to be as per at home. Military discipline was maintained. Red Cross took care of the parcels, and they were by ships. For several years, Red Cross ships, they had all those U-boats laying out there in the ocean. They were shooting so many freighters down, but never a Red Cross ship. The Red Cross ships went back and forth loaded with parcels for the prisoners, and they had their ship. They were not escorted, they all by themselves. They went back and forth, and they had their whole ship lit up. So the Germans knew this was a Red Cross ship, and they did not torpedo one of them. Here is in New York, a lot of volunteers were packaging parcels. They had enough, they supplied enough food, and the Germans confiscated a lot of them too. They are also starving the soldiers, the German soldiers, for 1.4 million men. The Red Cross did an awesome job. Here you can see the men on the receiving end. Here are some of the parcels that they needed for nutrition purposes. The YMCA, which is a Geneva-based organization, they took care of eating utensils, toothbrushes, musical instruments, books. They had libraries in those camps also. Here the suffering. They were always homesick. They were hungry most of the time. Cold. There was no heat in those barracks in the winter. Starvation diets. Depression and anxiety. I already get depressed and I'm not even in a camp, you know. So lack of health care, weight loss, dysentery. Dysentery, if I was a POW, I'll probably have dysentery all the time, day after day after day. It just runs right out of me. I eat something and gone. Fear of punishment, boredom was the greatest enemy. Filthy, unsanitary conditions, lice, and more lice. Lice are terrible. Lice transfer typhus and all kinds of diseases. When they bite you continuously, and it's filthy. Here's some frozen tomatoes, potatoes. You either work or you starve. Here's the library picture. Stalag Luft IV, Mr. Davis will be talking about this. If you crossed a particular line close to the fence, it's automatic death. The machine guns were always in your direction, towards the fence, and you're gone. No questions asked. Arbeitskommandos, they had Kriegsgefangene Arbeitskommandos, as groups of people that had to work. POWs below the rank of sergeant could be pressed to perform work. That means either you work or you don't get anything to eat. But that is totally different from the Arbeitskommandos in the concentration camp. In the concentration camp, they work the prisoners, the Jews in this case, to death, not in the POW camps. In 1944, in September, Reichsführer Himmler appointed an SS general to be in charge of all the POW camps and prepare for evacuation. The Russians were sitting on the horizon, pounding away with the artillery, and in those camps in Poland, they can hear them every day. So they decided to move the hundred thousands of POWs towards the west, away from the Russians. Death marches, they were in the middle, they started in February. February of that year was the coldest year in 100 years. Snow and ice. The guys, many of them slept outside. So here's some of the death marches. Stalag Luft III from Poland to all the way to Moosburg in Bavaria. This is Mr. Davies will be talking about this. From Lithuania, they marched people all the way to this and then combined those two together. And then here, Lambsdorff is another one of those marches. They were horrible places. Here, all the way, they marched out of Poland, around Czechoslovakia, all the way up here to Nuremberg, and then they took the train to Moosburg. That is the Stalag Luft III people. They all have their own terrible story. The liberation was not always that smooth. If you were caught by the Russians kept you hostage for a while, and 3 months later you finally come home. But the rest of the POWs who were liberated by the Brits, the Americans, and the French, they were at home. Not you, because you were now you're in Russian captivity. Here you see, after you were liberated in those camps, they moved you to the cigarette camps. The cigarette camps were along the coast of northern France, and Mr. Davies will tell you, he ended up eventually, after he was in Nancy, right? Nancy? In Nancy. Nancy, France. That's you when he got cleaned up out there, because those guys were in bad shape. And then they were prepared for departure home by Liberty ship, and they were out of Lucky Strike. So they had all those camps set up. The command system knew they had so many hundred thousands of men to take care of, and they were in bad shape. You know, you can't send those guys on the ship home. First, you need to fix them up. And that's what they're doing in those cigarette camps also. That's what they call them, the cigarette camps, after all those brands. I only recognize a few. This might be from way back. They went back on Liberty ships, so did he. And this happens to be a picture of a Liberty ship that's still around. After you were here a while, the government set up a system that you can apply for a POW medal. This is this one right here. Every POW can get one of his medals.